Hi, communicators and communicurious. You're listening to For Immediate Release, where this month we talk about a well-meaning tweet that has backfired on a fast food company. Do you subscribe to this podcast or do you follow it? We dig into why that verb may be changing in the podcast world. Another company has fired an employee for building a big following on TikTok by sharing videos about work. Have you seen the drone footage from the Minneapolis bowling alley? We chat about that. And we take a look at Timely, a new drop-in audio social networking app, one of many trying to take on the Clubhouse behemoth. But mostly we're focused this month on NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and what they might mean for marketing and communications. Dan York reports on WordPress and Google. All this and more is coming your way right this very minute on For Immediate Release. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to For Immediate Release, the Hobson Holtz Report, number 205 for March 2021. This is Neville Hobson in Thatcham in England.
And this is Shell Holtz in Concord, California. We are delighted to be here with you.
We are, and also hi to anyone who is watching us on YouTube. We know there are a couple of folks in there, so welcome. And before we get into our discussions, I wanted to let you know about something new. It's actually Renew, something Shell and I used to do back in the day. Probably the last one we did would have been 6-7 years ago, which is FIR interviews, where we interview interesting people that have things interesting to say that would appeal to the audience for this podcast. So we sometimes do them together. We sometimes do them separately. We've got a batch here. Shell's done most of them. We've got the first one, Phil Gomes, that he and Shell are in conversation about NFTs, right? And that's up, ready for listening. One that Shell and I did together a few days ago, discussion with Andrea Veckerli and Jolie Odell of Civilination. Andrea's the founder of Civilination about a decade or so ago. Jolie has just been appointed as the new managing director, CEO of the nonprofit. We interviewed, or rather you did, Shell, interviewed Andrea in 2010, so 10, just over 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And she wrote a book that our book review editor at the time, Bob LeDrew, reviewed that in 2013. So there was a book review published and under FIR book reviews. We should do a lot of those too. And so here we are, 11 years later from that first interview, where we talked about a number of things, starting really with what's changed in 10 years on the efforts of Civilination. And the name of the organization is a good clue to what Andrea used to focus on: civility, being nice, and a lot more than just that. So Andrea and Jolie took us through what's happening, what's been happening, and what they're looking to do in the coming years. And the final of the trio of new FIR interviews is one Shell did with David Murray.
Actually, I'm going to. That one hasn't been recorded yet.
Okay, so coming soon, right?
Yep.
So it's coming soon. A conversation with David Murray on An Effort to Understand, which is a book he has just written. And the final one to mention is one that Shell does for IABC, which is the Circle of Fellows. Episode 66 on being a successful consultant is also now up on the podcast, on our network site, FIRpodcast.com.
Okay, and I wanted to mention that the interview I'm going to be doing with David Murray started with an exchange on Facebook. I'm about halfway through his book, which is a book of essays that are focused on communication, hence the effort to understand, which you do through communication. But one of the things David says in the book is that communication cannot be strategic or measured. And Angela Sinicus had said something about reading his book, and I asked her what she thought of that statement. And David jumped in and said, oh, it's more nuanced than that. And our back and forth led to the invitation to have the conversation, which may be more of a debate on an FIR interview. And Angela also popped in and said, I'm interested in hearing that since David was the editor of my book on internal communication measurement all those years ago. So it should be fun.
Okay, great.
Well, before we jump into our content today, we do want to take just a second to acknowledge our sponsor, Polite Mail, which is out with its 2021 Internal Communications Benchmarks Data Report, which offers data on email reach, readership, and engagement with key metrics supporting the idea that email is the most effective corporate communications channel. I have to tell you, I saw an article in the New Yorker that was also based on data and had the headline, Email is Making Us Miserable, which I suppose demonstrates the Polite Mail email for internal communications is a worthy solution that won't make your employees miserable. Certainly, internal communicators are using it, sending 72% more email broadcasts in 2020 than in 2019. And employees spent 44% more time with it and clicked 82% more links. And I attribute all of this to the pandemic, reduced face-to-face opportunities. We'll have a link to the full report, which is based on an analysis of nearly 1.5 billion internal emails sent to 8.5 million employees around the world. I hope by now you've actually checked out Polite Mail, but if not, and you work in internal communications, you should visit politemail.com and learn how Polite Mail can help you elevate your email game and your communications in general. There's a drag-and-drop responsive design tool, the ability to send personalized emails to people on your existing distribution lists, and real-time results that you'll find right inside of Outlook. You don't actually have to go log on to the Polite Mail website to check your dashboards. The reports include heat maps, executive dashboards, and visualizations that show your opens, clicks, reach, attention, readership, and engagement. Whew. Once again, that URL is politemail.com, and as ever, we thank Polite Mail for their continued sponsorship of For Immediate Release. Well, let's get into our content, and we're going to start with a story about a tweet. Somebody I knew used to say that good intentions and a quarter will get you a cup of coffee, which is a hint as to how long ago I knew this person because it's been a while since you could get a cup of coffee for a quarter. But the sentiment is still valid, and Burger King is probably taking it to heart these days. I suspect a lot of listeners have already heard the story, but for those who haven't, on International Women's Day last Monday, Burger King UK tweeted the words, "Women belong in the kitchen." Now, them's fighting words if all you look at is that one tweet and not the series of threaded tweets that followed, which pointed to the fact that women are significantly underrepresented among the ranks of restaurant chefs. So the tweet, "Women belong in the kitchen," was followed by, among other things, "if they want to, of course. Yet only 20% of chefs are women. We're on a mission to change the gender ratio in the restaurant industry by empowering female employees with the opportunity to pursue a culinary career." This was followed by information about a new scholarship program for female employees of Burger King to, quote, pursue their culinary dreams. Now, the intent here is exemplary. They're standing up for a social issue and they're taking concrete action. It's directly related to their line of business and it involves their own employees. And yet they wound up having to delete the tweet later that day and tweet an apology in which they had to explain what the standalone tweet, "Women belong in the kitchen," meant. So, okay, you see the apology that says their aim was to draw attention to the fact that 20% of professional chefs in UK kitchens are women and to help that change by awarding culinary scholarships. But one person reacted to the apology by creating a single tweet that covered all of the details. Then she retweeted it, noting that it was proof that the whole story could have fit into one tweet, and then added, "Please don't use sexism as clickbait. The men in my mentions prove the damage you're causing by doing this." Somebody else wrote, "There's better ways to draw attention to something that don't include using the most sexist trope ever." Burger King did end up removing the tweet after KFC Gaming tweeted, "The best time to delete this post was immediately after posting it. The second best time is now." Ad Age called the whole kerfuffle one of the major brand blunders of the year so far, and a prime example of the perils of using shock value in social media marketing to grab the attention of social media users, especially when the cause is not a laughing matter. Ad Age quoted Lene Cook, a former social media strategist for Starbucks. We're going to hear about Starbucks later in this episode. Lene said that where the tweet really stung is that on a day meant to honor women, Burger King put themselves first and the wellness of women somewhere far down below that. That bit about shock value is one to spend a minute thinking about. The author of the Ad Age piece, Elise Liffring, wrote this. The truth is that social media has crafted an environment where brands, always seeking to be in front of consumers, are resorting to ways to beat platforms' algorithms, which fill user feeds based on high engagement and their content history. In other words, a platform prioritizes content that might be alarming, risky, or appalling, but starts conversations. A brand posting significant or relevant to their audience might not fare as well as the one that is always putting their spin on a cultural moment or constantly sharing their take on the latest internet meme. By the way, Burger King also bought a full-page ad in the New York Times with the same message. Evidently, the Twitter campaign was actually a deconstruction of that newspaper ad into multiple tweets. But even that ad, which has all the information in one place, but the headline, Women Belong in the Kitchen, very large, even that got criticism. My favorite part of the article, though, is a suggestion by crisis expert Eric Bernstein, who suggests brands or agencies have a specific person or a small committee with people not too close to the project who can objectively ask, what could go wrong? Now, back in 2014, I heard an episode of Freakonomics Radio about a consultant whose team would work with project teams that were just about to launch their project. They'd turn off the lights, light candles and incense and the like, get everyone all zen, and then have them close their eyes and project themselves 6 months into the future after their project has failed dismally. And they'd have to ask what went wrong. And all of these folks would suddenly come up with problems that hadn't occurred to them up to this point that needed to be addressed before the launch. Now, ever since I've heard that episode, I've been building into my strategic planning that last component before you go live, which is looking at it objectively and asking what could go wrong. That probably could have saved Burger King this reputational stumble.
Yeah, it certainly is a stumble that they made. They got themselves into some hot water, as evidenced by everyone piling in with their unsolicited advice, some good suggestions, but mostly, I think, assuming. And that's one of the aspects of social media I notice has been growing in recent years is the fact that whatever you say, there's going to be at least 20,000 other people are going to tell you what they think as well with advice. And we saw that. I don't think they were trying to be adding shock value or clickbait, although you could argue that their orphan tweet was clickbait because you had to click and it would drive people to do that. I think that's true. The grave mistake, as everyone has noted, was simply that, separating out that headline from the rest of the content, because the message is a very good one, but they screwed up big time the way they did it. And I'm thinking in particular about our conversation with Andrea and Jolie in the interview that I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Jolie had some interesting comments to make on that, which others have said in what you've read out, which is, was there a PR person on the group that was planning this? Was there someone who did the hang on a sec kind of questioning as to whether this was even a good idea to do it like that? Could it have been misinterpreted? Well, was it right and royally was misinterpreted? I did like their apology, their final apology on March the 8th, where they acknowledged the comments. We hear you, they say. We got our initial tweet wrong and we're sorry. Our aim was to draw attention to the fact that only 20% of professional chefs in UK kitchens are women, and to help change that by awarding culinary scholarships. We will do better next time. Because knowing that, you can see the headline then in the better context. But hey, that's not what actually happened at the time. They tweeted this thing that any normal person, well, no, let's not call it a normal person, any regular person. If I saw it, I'd think, hang on a minute, this looks like a mistake, rather than be outraged that they're being sexist. Most people, though, did the latter, didn't they? And so some well-meaning people have piled in with lengthy missives on what they should have done and what it all means and how the heaven's now going to fall in on them, etc., etc. It isn't going to do any of those things. The folks in the social team might get knuckles rapped and something else might happen, who knows, but they have learned from it. But you're right, I think, in pointing out the whole saga as a salutary lesson, a bit like that one from over a decade ago. Shall you remember this? I know, because it was the first time I saw the F word in a tweet. Chrysler talking about someone who, and this was their agency, who forgot which account they were logged into, and tweeted a disparaging mark about how effing useless everyone in Chrysler were in Detroit were, who didn't know how to drive, and it went out on the Chrysler account instead. And okay, that's not exactly the same thing as this, but that is on the list of lessons to be learned. The person lost their job, and I think the agency was fired as well. So there were severe consequences from that one. So it illustrates all over, really. You've got to take care when you're doing something, whether it's that. I mean, we've all done it. I've done it. You forget which account you logged into, and you do something. Oops. If you're quick, you can delete it before anyone sees it, which is not always the case. Or you've got something like this, which was a stunt by any other way of describing it, that did not work because the execution was not planned well. And so they've learned. Let's hope they don't do anything like it again. So they got a lot of press out of it, I suppose you could argue. I noticed that the original tweet, which of course they say they deleted it, a screenshot in, let's see, on the Creative blog shows that when they took the screenshot, that the tweet had, let's see, where is it? It was like 325,000 likes and 118,000 comments. Obviously, many of them the outrage. It doesn't show in the screenshot how many retweets they got, how many shares. So probably lots, I would say. But it certainly got a lot of attention. So I guess you could argue that whether critics like it or not, there was a visibility benefit they got out of it eventually. I think most people will recognize that they made a mistake and they know they did and they've apologized for it. So you give them some slack here. We don't think they're going to have it again. In the meantime, let's add this to the list of things we will teach in our social media classes. All the consultants out there in particular, you've got another piece of great content to illustrate. Don't do this.
Yeah, let me read a couple of comments here from Chip Griffin, who is watching us as we are streaming this live.
I'm seeing them in the list here. Yeah, they're great, aren't they?
Yeah, with so many things that should produce actual outrage, it continues to amaze me how much time is spent on manufactured outrage on Twitter. Then he says, only someone looking to be outraged could actually believe that the first tweet was serious and literal.
Well, there were a lot of people like that tweet. A lot of people like that on that stream.
And finally, Chip says, if McDonald's posted the world is as flat as the griddle we cook our burgers on, should we believe that they really mean the world is not round, or should we think that there is another shoe to drop? Interestingly, while most people who were outraged about this had taken the first tweet as a discrete tweet and didn't see the subsequent ones, there were some people who didn't like it even though it was attached to their effort to, so.
Of course.
But again, I think the idea that Eric Bernstein floated of having somebody who's more detached, maybe somebody who's not working on that account, take a look at it.
This is in line with what Jolie said in our interview. You have someone there who can cast a dispassionate eye on what you're doing to make sure that, have you considered this, that, and the other? Even then, it may not have been seen. I suspect it would have been if they had a bit of scrutiny on the separation of the headline from the rest of the message. It's a shame, but I give them a lot of slack here. I think they've paid the price for it.
Yeah, for me, it was just that notion that before you do something major, in this case, the introduction of a significant social activity, you really need to do that projection out and say, what haven't we thought about that could go wrong with this?
Yeah. I mean, I think, just reflecting a bit on one of Chip's comments, the one where he says only someone looking to be outraged could actually believe that first tweet was serious and literal. You see that all the time these days. On literally any topic you can possibly imagine, from someone who's got 10 followers through to a corporation with 5 million, you'll find they're going to tweet something that some people, this is the thing to to kind of try and get your head around why some people are literally, purple in the face, high blood pressure outrage over the most obscure damn things, for God's sake. And that feeds on others. And suddenly you've got this whole meme going, this whole conversation going with, 3,000 tweets of people all agreeing and saying, yeah, and I thought this, and my God, what is wrong with some of these people? So that's our culture today, is it not? That's society, it seems to me, because it's everywhere. And I can understand some people who see it, that kind of reaction, as threatening, as something that they're very apprehensive about. It affects your mental health. I know some people who've been constantly piled on as more people discover that conversation and criticize them for what they did about something or what they said. And that feeds into, I think, a large point, and I'll mention it yet again, our discussion with Andrea and Jolie, and what they're trying to do with civilization, which we're seeing examples every day. I class many of the commenters on this topic as in that area of people who are, looking to be outraged. And sure enough, they are. And they will damn well tell you they're outraged and constantly do it for days, probably. So, this is not a nice place to be. So you've got to find a way to just tune all this stuff out. I mean, the best route for Burger King was not to have done that in the first place. But they did. And this will surface in months' time. I tell you, this will be on the outrage circuit for a while.
Well, as Chip says, down the road, it'll only be remembered in sales presentations by social media experts. But yeah, I agree, this will not have long-term repercussions for Burger King.
No.
In the defense of at least some of the people who are outraged, there is the whole Me Too movement that is going on, and heightened sensitivities because of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. And I think on International Women's Day to send that message was particularly not well thought out.
Right, so interesting discussion, Shell, without any question. Next up, let's talk about podcasting. And something I found quite interesting, this news report from Pod News, who seem to be the ones who broke that news. That's James Cridland, who's based in Australia, about a change in terminology that is in the works, it seems, driven by Apple. Now, Apple Podcasts is the world's largest podcast directory by any measures. And what they're proposing is that we're not going to say, how do you get hold of a podcast? They're not going to say subscribe anymore. We want people to say follow. So you don't subscribe to a podcast, you follow a podcast. And they're making the change in that terminology in the podcasting app for iOS devices, which is the default app for podcasting. So most people will use that. So you won't be able to subscribe anymore, you'll follow. What's the reason for this, you might wonder? Well, there's actually a lot of sense behind the reason, it seems to me, from what Pod News has been reporting. Indeed, many of the tech journalists, mostly, who've commented on what they have had to say, that it seems to me that it addresses a question that there is a survey out in the US that says that 47% of people who don't subscribe to podcasts see the word subscribe as off-putting. They see the word subscribe meaning it costs money. And I get that to a certain extent. I can understand that, particularly in a climate you've got where the word subscribe in podcasting terms is apparently in use, meaning both. And you don't know that there's pay option until you hit subscribe, and then you get the kind of option to pay money. So that seems to be an issue. I can't say it is an issue. I don't know. I've never encountered that, but I see others talking about it. I have seen others talking about this before, and it seems to be a bit of a problem. So follow is the proposed word that might help people understand that you don't have to pay. That seems to be how the thinking goes on this. So would Apple's move be a persuasive one to persuade others to take up this idea? A bit of clout maybe by other podcast directories? Well, Pod News says that's already starting. They say that other podcast apps have already changed. Spotify and Audible use follow. Stitcher uses plus follow. Amazon Music uses heart follow. Meanwhile, Google Podcasts and Castbox use plus subscribe. And Overcast and Castro uses subscribe. Now, there may be others who use other phrases too. So there's a whole lot of confusion, I think, bubbling still as to what these mean to people. Still in an age where many people have to actively click something to sign up to get a podcast. It's still in that stage where we were at the very beginning. Lots has happened in the meantime. So we need a consistent way to describe this, it seems to me, if there is to be a change. And it's still not sure there's going to be a change, by the way. Apple may change, will others? That's the thing. It might help address confusion over the word subscribe that exists. So if there is a more acceptable word to do that. Thing is, though, I'm not sure follow is the right word if there is a change. It seems to me such a passive word that doesn't really connect you with the content. And that's the key thing, it seems to me. We need to be focusing on that. Nearly 20 years has passed since podcasting came out, where you had to think of things like RSS feeds, podcatchers, and the tech that you have to use to get the podcast. That was how you had to do it back in those days, in which case your audiences typically were limited to subject matter experts with a keen interest and the kind of tech influenced early adopter crowd who knew all about having to, get an RSS feed and install a podcatcher and configure it and all that. So now, though, things have shifted quite substantially where you don't have to do any of those things. You can actually use an app or visit a website and click or tap something and you've got the content. You don't have to think about words like RSS feeds or even subscribe for that matter in many cases. So I think if there's to be an alternative to this, if it does address that apparent problem, it ought to be something that focuses on the content, not on the mechanics of how you get the content, which is what we've been having to do largely until now. So I don't think follows the right word. My preference would be, if we had to make a change, would be listen. So listen in my book means the content. So I want to listen to a podcast. I want to listen to what so-and-so has to say. I'm not so much interested in, subscribe. What does that mean? I've got to click something and I'm that kind of got committed to it. I just want the content. So listen works for me. Whether it streams that at that moment, whether it downloads an MP3 file, whatever it does, I don't care, actually. And I also want to be sure that if I do that, I get the next episode when it comes out, if it's a periodic audio publication. That's what I want. And this would, I think, help do that. Thing is, though, it's not clear that even that is the right answer. We might not need to have an alternative word. If a primary goal is to eliminate this apparent confusion between subscribe meaning paid for, in which case, why can't we do stuff like sign up? Maybe subscribe for free. Maybe even listen for free if we had to do that. That would surely indicate to someone who thinks, is this paid or not? That it's not paid. Subscribe for free. There's no cost. So it might be something that is, it'll all die out in a few weeks' time. I don't think so, actually. I think if Apple is doing what they're doing, this will create a groundswell without any doubt. And if we've got then others doing listen the way I'm seeing happening with little badges all over the place that say listen, then we've got a real confusion situation here. So we need to have some consistency. So if we've got currently, everyone uses subscribe. You and I do with For Immediate Release, the other ones that I do and others I see all over. I've yet to see anyone who doesn't use subscribe, except perhaps listen. And I didn't really notice until the other day looking at the badges that I've got on the other podcasts I do, the Small Data Forum podcast, all listened to. And I hadn't noticed that until now. So will this be a change? I don't know. I think it's not a storm in a teacup. It's certainly not something minuscule because if you've got Apple on board the way they are and others doing their thing, then this could move somewhere. I just think there's a risk at moving in all sorts of different directions, not solving the problem at all and creating other ones. What do you think, Sean?
Click here to never miss an episode.
Yeah, but you can't click on a mobile device. You tap on a mobile device. Yeah.
If half the people who don't currently listen to podcasts think it means that subscribing will cost them money, I'm good with not using that word. It had never occurred to me for all these years that we have been doing this. But when I stop and think about it, because you surfaced this story, I said, well, I subscribe to my newspapers and they cost money. I subscribe to Netflix and Amazon Prime. They cost money. Hulu and Disney Plus and Apple Plus. I subscribe to the Adobe Creative Suite. That costs money. So seeing subscribe on a podcast, if you haven't been using them, it's not an unreasonable expectation that they're going to charge you. Listen, when I hear that, when I go out and do the promotions for episodes of FIR on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I do the gaggle lamp for the people in our gaggle who have signed on to promote for us, I say, listen, because it's all about this episode. But if I want people to have it show up on their app every episode, that's not listen, that's subscribe or follow or something. It's making sure that you get every episode rather than listen to this one. Interestingly, Chip says, should podcast discovery be more episode-based like YouTube videos with subscriptions or follows as a secondary tool? And, that's why we do the show notes, is so that somebody searching for the topic we talked about on that particular episode will find that episode and be able to listen by clicking the play button or downloading it. But if they like what they hear and want to hear more of these every episode, then I want them to follow.
Yeah, that is the bit that's still a bit of a question mark, I think, because I believe, having thought about this since I first saw this story, because I'd not really thought about this at all until I read that. And then I read what everyone else was saying, linked to James Cridland's Pod News post, saying basically the same thing, actually. Got me thinking, though, that I think, after nearly 20 years of podcasting, you and I have been involved in it since the very, very beginning. Surely it is time to move the needle away from the technology of how you get your podcast to the content. And that to me would be served by Listen, where you click or tap and you listen. That's it. Doesn't quite address does that mean I automatically get future episodes? What if I don't want a future episode? So how do we address those choice issues? I don't know yet. But some of the tech on how you get your podcast should be able to address that. So you could maybe have in a podcast, a podcatcher, right, on your mobile device, a setting that tells you, okay, this publication, this audio publication, bring me every episode. This one, just bring me the one I'm listening to and don't do anymore, or some such thing automatically. And still not wholly satisfactory, though, because the foibles of human behavior is you're going to say, yeah, I didn't really mean all those, I meant those three, and I don't want any more after that one. And this one, I want them all. I mean, yeah, how do you address that? So maybe this is an AI approach has got to be to figuring out what the AI thinks you're likely to want to do. Well, that's taking it in a slightly different area, I think. But it seems to me that this ought to be where the conversation goes about this, not about the tech of how to get it, and not about how you describe the act of getting it, but about the content and how you don't have to think about those things. It just shows up. And that was the ideal in the very beginning, wasn't it, where the RSS feeds were for.
Right, and they're still based on RSS feeds. If you want to get really technical, you're not subscribing to the audio, you're subscribing to the RSS feed that has the enclosure that contains the link to the audio.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. You and I know those things because we're interested in that kind of stuff. But
the 47% who don't listen to podcasts don't know, don't care.
No. So this is an open debate. And I definitely would be interested to know what people listening think of this idea. If you've never listened to a podcast, well, you're no good because you wouldn't be listening to this one, would you? But anyone who's got a view apart from Chip would be, please let us know your thoughts on this and where you'd like to see this going.
Normally I'd have a regular story in this slot, and Dan York's report, by the way, is coming up right after this. But I have two shorter items I want to cover today. Number one, you remember the story of Tony Pilsano? He's the Ohio University senior working at Sherwin-Williams, who was doing TikToks for his 1.2 million followers about mixing paint at Sherwin-Williams, and they fired him for it. Well, now it's Starbucks' turn. I told you something more with Starbucks is coming up. They fired Xander Jura. He was a barista who was sharing TikTok videos about what it's like to work there. He danced for customers. He answered questions about his job. He demonstrated how to make trending beverages. He shared drive-through secrets. Then he announced on TikTok that Starbucks had fired him. And as the article I read noted, he did, in Starbucks' defense, take a sip of a customer's drink. But you'd think that would warrant a warning more than a dismissal. The marketing publication Campaign US says Starbucks really missed a bet here. They should have recognized that Xander is a better brand marketer than he is a barista. Their recommendation is to boost your brand from the inside by rewarding transparency. They pointed out he did a tutorial about how to make one particular drink that was very messy and real and authentic, that was better than any Starbucks ad they'd ever seen. And it shows that Starbucks has nothing to hide, and it made them want to buy one of those drinks. They also recommended leaning into uncomfortable truths and understanding that your employer brand is your brand.
Well, yeah, I mean, you wonder sometimes. I mean, the Sherwin-Williams one was one of those face slap ones when they actually fired the guy for doing that. Couldn't see beyond the fact that he was outside his job description, in a sense. Is this like that with this guy in Starbucks, I wonder? Not knowing any more than you've told me, Shell. I mean, I think this is another face slap one without any doubt. Yeah. They could have made a lot of his talent and to their own benefit and to his as well. Instead, they chose not to, and it's their loss, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to wonder, you remember the guy from Sherwin-Williams ended up being hired by a Florida paint company and given a studio to do this stuff.
He's in seventh heaven, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. Who's going to hire the Starbucks guy, right? I mean, obviously he's got some savvy when it comes to presenting this kind of information in a compelling way. So somebody's going to snatch him up. I suspect we'll see that article in the next week or two.
He'd be good at an agency, I would say, in a digital agency. Yeah.
Yeah. Or a Starbucks competitor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pete's ought to grab him, depending on whether they have operations where he's at. The other story I wanted to mention, I've added to the mix just because it's so damn cool. Neville, I know you've seen the drone footage of the Minneapolis bowling alley. It's an 87-second video of a drone flying around a bowling alley. It goes through the bar and the restaurant area, and then it goes down a couple of lanes and behind where the pins get set, where the machinery is, and ultimately it goes down a lane and crashes into the pins. The drone's operator shot the video in order to gain attention for the bowling alley. They're open again under the rules of in Minneapolis, and they're trying to get people to come back. So it was, really just for marketing purposes. But what happened was Hollywood took notice. One director, the guy who directed the Disney Pixar movie Coco, called it one of the most amazing things he'd ever seen. Others who remarked on it were the actor Elijah Wood, James Gunn, who directed the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. He called it stupendous. And a visual effects artist who worked on the Star Wars and the Transformers films said it was just beautiful. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. There's a link to it in the show notes. But more to the point, if you haven't considered using a drone to showcase some of your organization's facilities, this footage should inspire you to give it a try.
It really was extraordinary, wasn't it? I saw it. I first saw it on Digital Trends, a digital publication, and it's been everywhere online, as you can imagine. I've seen it so many times repeated by people posting links to it on Facebook. So people are impressed with it. One thing that impressed the hell out of me, Shell, I have to say, apart from the obvious, like the skill of the piloting the drone to get it, in between people's legs, to fly at speed across the ceiling, whiz past people sitting at the bar, all that kind of stuff, was the audio quality. The audio editing, very slick, where as it flies, for instance, there's one scene where it flips over the pins into the area behind the pins, goes along behind the pins, does a right turn down a little corridor, and emerges out into the bowling alley again and zooms over the heads of people sitting at the bar. And as it flies past through the hatch, into like a cinema area where there's people drinking and talking, you catch snips of the conversation that fade in and fade out as it goes past each group. And that adds something really magical to this video. And that crash you mentioned at the end, it's kind of like the natural culmination of it. It wasn't an accident that terminated the whole thing. I did see on Digital Trends, they quoted something quite interesting. They had a report, not surprisingly, the film has impressed Hollywood too, suggesting there could be some serious offers coming the way of Raleigh Studios before too long. I bet you that happens.
Oh, undoubtedly. They used a racing drone for this, and I'm sure they went through the route several times very slowly to make sure they had all the turns and moves plotted out just perfectly. But yeah, I saw that, and I was just thinking, new higher orientation. We're going to show you our manufacturing facility on stills on a PowerPoint deck. Oh my God, this could be so much more fun than that.
Phenomenal.
Greetings, Shell and Neville and FIR listeners all around the world. It's Dan York coming at you from Shelburne, Vermont with this month's report. I want to begin following up on what we talked about in show 204 with Twitter Spaces. There's been a lot of changes happening since that time. What's fascinating is Twitter's really developing it out in the open. So if you follow the Twitter Spaces channel on Twitter, you will see all the different things they're doing. They've been adding, they have added a title description field so that you can see what's the title, what is going on, the subject of the space before you join it. They are working on co-hosts, on discovery, on moderation. They're looking at adding a tip jar of some type where you could potentially be able to pay people, who are there if you like the space or something like that. It's also available now on Android. The iOS app got some upgrades to it, and supposedly, from what they said at the last community meeting, everyone will be able to have access to Twitter Spaces sometime in April. So if you haven't played around with it yet, your opportunity may be coming soon, and at the very least, from both iOS and Android, you'll be able to go and participate and potentially soon host as well. I want to talk about WordPress a little bit and two things. First, WordPress released on March 8th. They said, introducing WordPress Stories, a new way to engage your audience. My first thought when I saw this was stories. Wow, like Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, all of that. And it's something kind of like that. I've played with it a little bit on one of my own sites. And what it is it's the story format in the shape of a blog post. So you compose on the WordPress app on your Android or iOS device, and you compose it like you would a story on Instagram or Snapchat or Twitter, whatever, any of those. You put together pictures, you can put text on top of it, you can do different pieces like that. And then when you're done with it, you hit the button and you post. And then it goes up to your site as a blog post, a story post in this particular case. Now, here's a detail, right? This isn't stories like we have for Twitter fleets or Instagram stories or Facebook stories. It's not something separate that you subscribe to, but it's giving you the ability to go and create a story-like post in your site. This works with the iOS and Android apps. They say they're looking to bring it to iPad and desktop and web, but quite honestly, unlike those other platforms, it is viewable everywhere, right? You can look at it in your desktop web browser. You can look at it anywhere because it's ultimately a blog post using a new story block that is available on there. Now, I mean, it's different from Twitter's fleets or Instagram stories because it is permanent, right? It has a specific URL. It is part of your blog. It's editable. You can actually go in and edit the stories and edit and change things. Now, it's not quite up to what you have in some of the other platforms as far as how you can go and work with your stories. Like you can't resize the pictures and some things and stuff, but it's an interesting addition. I don't know how much I'll actually use it because it is being posted to my main site, but I do see it as a way to mix some things up now and then. Or when I'm at an event, if I want to use my mobile device to post a bunch of story format pictures, then I could be able to go and do this to my site. It's also a good way to permanently store some of those stories that you may have created to use in Twitter's fleets or Instagram stories, but then they're gone, right? In 24 hours, that's the point. Now with this, you could potentially put them up onto your site and have them there to reference or to show people or whatever else. Now, of course, being purely graphics, they're not going to be great for SEO because they're all images. And I don't know yet about the accessibility side of it, but it's something I might mix in along the way. Anyway, that's it. WordPress stories. You can do it on WordPress.com hosted sites or on self-hosted sites where you have the Jetpack plugin. Those are the places where you can go and do that. Speaking of WordPress, of course, this past week saw the release of WordPress 5.7. It's not a dramatic change in what WordPress can do, but it has a lot of neat little features and things. If you're working with the editor, you can go and make some changes. Like one thing I've wanted is I wanted to take the cover block and sometimes have it fill the entire screen. Well, now you can. The buttons block, the social icons block. There's easier ways to go and make font adjustments. There's a bunch of things in there. There's some technical things that geeks like me like, which make it, for instance, easier to go from an HTTP to HTTPS website. You can just go click a button basically and it'll help change all the URLs that are buried in there. One feature I do like from a performance point of view is that it will go and do lazy loading of iframes that are embedded. Things like YouTube videos or other elements like that will be now what's called lazy loading, meaning they're not loaded. The page isn't waiting for them to load if they're not like in the first part of the screen that somebody would see. If they're farther down the page, then they will load kind of after the first part of the page comes in. That's kind of critical. Anyway, 5.7 is out. You can go install it, upgrade it. Maybe you already have seen that. But one reason why performance is important, and I mentioned that lazy loading, is because May is when Google brings out a new search engine result ranking factor called Core Web Vitals. It's going to be included in the user experience ranking factors, along with, do you have your site over HTTPS? Is it mobile friendly? Other elements like that. Now, there's so much we could talk about that. I've talked a little bit in a couple of my FIR reports, but I did actually publish a whole FIR on technology episode 6 about this, understanding Core Web Vitals and how this comes into play in Google search rankings in May. The quick version is, this is a tweak to which could help you increase your search rankings. If you have the content to rank highly, then this may help you rank higher than other websites that have similar content to yours. So it's important. It is all about performance, how fast your sites load, how quickly people can interact with them, how stable they are as people visit those sites. So again, you can go to web.dev. That's literally the address, web.dev/vitals, and you can learn more. You also can listen to FIR on Technology, episode 6, where you can learn much more about all of that. So that's my important point, because the deadline, the change will happen sometime in May, but in fact, Google uses it based on field recorded data for the last 28 days. So it's actually really important to start working on this as soon as you can, because they take the last 28 days of data to make their rankings change in some ways. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I would encourage people, if you can, join in the Thursday afternoon, well, it's afternoon US East Coast time, FIR calls that Shell's been hosting. It's 30 minutes. You get to chat with, often Shell and Neville, myself, Chip Griffin, other people who are part of the show and part of the community. It's a great way to work with that. I'd say, please do that. You can find more of my audio and writing at danyork.me. Thanks for listening, and back to you, Shell and Neville. Bye for now.
So, Dan, thanks very much for that. Twitter Spaces is a great intro to talking about another audio social network, if I can call it that. So I'm not sure what we call it, really. Audio social network sounds good to me. You got me thinking of Jeremiah Aoyang's depth post a few weeks ago now, where he mentions, I think, 30 or so startups in this space. I mean, it's truly extraordinary. Therein lies, I think, potentially what I'm seeing some people mention. Is there a bubble here? Okay, that's kind of part of the conversation we could have at some point on the Clubhouse and the rest of them. But this is a new one called Timely. Good name, Timely. Timely Conversations. I heard about this through the developer tweeted me on a couple of days ago that this new app is there. It piqued my interest, of course, so I went and took a look. There's an Android app and an iOS app, so you don't have to be only on on one or the other. The app, the Android one, certainly, because that's what I have as an Android device, is there on Google Play. I installed it, didn't crash, didn't do anything it shouldn't. And then when I looked at the website, there were a few questions I had because it doesn't say anything about who's behind it, where they're located. The T's and C's and all that talk about legal things and so forth. It doesn't say anything about which jurisdiction governs contracts and stuff like that. So I asked them, and they replied and gave me the details of their registration company's house in the UK. They're a UK registered company. So I went and took a look. It's all legit, and that's fine. I've not had time to progress the conversation further than that. So it's another entrant, the kind of marketing speak for describing what they are is short audio drop-in chat without invites. Everyone is welcome. And I think, okay, that's good. They also say in their promotional work, Timely announces its features will not resemble Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces. So it's kind of clear where they're positioning themselves. They sent some additional information as well, which kind of, it was interesting that they did this. I didn't ask for this, but they followed up by saying, it means user data is and will always be compliant with the GDPR. That's something good to emphasize, I would say. One thing we don't do at Timely, they say, is harvest user phone contacts. I mean, you hear that. Oh, I've heard that mostly as a criticism of Clubhouse, where before you can do anything, they kind of suck in all your contact details from your contact list on your phone, and then they email everyone or whatever they do with all that data. We don't ask for access to phone contact when you join, unlike other competitors who may use such methods to aggressively send user notifications. And the concluding comment is, we are founded on privacy. Great to say all those things. I think that needs to be demonstrated by action, but they're brand new, so it'll take a bit of time. I am going to try them now that they've answered my initial question. That made me a little more comfortable. I think the space for this requires any organization joining in now to have some kind of differentiator. Otherwise, they're just, why would you bother with them if you're going to start chatting? I think it's interesting how they're starting out. They're taking they're doing a lot of activity on Reddit, which is where they're focusing. It may be a marketing plan. I call it more engaging with potential users. So does that tell us likely who they think as the likely user is a Reddit user of some form? Possibly. I don't know. They talk about when they first posted on Reddit, which was only less than a week ago, because they've only literally started up within the past week. They say it's the alternative to Clubhouse for Android users. We're working hard to bring more features to Timely, they say, as fast as we can, but right now you can use Timely without an invite. So the way that's worded suggests there might be invites in the future. I don't know. We really appreciate your patience and can't wait to welcome you. They then talk, what else are they saying here? They're working on the new mobile platform, alternative Clubhouse. I mentioned that in the early stage of development, we're looking for users to test our app so we can learn more about user feedback. We're on Play Store, and to be part of the early testing, you need to download the APK. Well, that's at the very beginning stage. They've moved on from that. So they talk about getting your audience built up there as well. Once they are in your Timely room, they can join and do their own. So there's no limit. There's no restriction on the activity you can do, judging by this. But they repeat in their messaging, they are in the early stages of testing. So it's live. It's there. They're not describing it as a beta, but clearly if they're in testing, it's not kind of ready for total prime time yet. So that's probably a good approach. There's no big fanfare with this, and I don't know whether that's any different to what others have done, but they reached out to me, so I'll be looking into them more than I would otherwise be the case. So this does, I think, have potential. I can't really say more of what I think of it yet until I've tried it. So given that you and I are focused on this, expect an invitation from me on your phone once I've done that bit. So you can then decide whether you want to do it or not. But that's the extent of it. I like the approach, I have to say. Not totally clear, I suppose, on the USP, nor on the references that they've made multiple times in the Reddit about their focused on privacy. I need some evidence of that. So I'm going to try it. I'm not going to do any funny tricks with I'll use a special phone only for this in case. No, either I trust them or they don't. They replied to my tweets. They gave me the information I requested, and I'm okay with that. So I will then now try it out. So like I said, Shell, I'll send you an invite so you can tell what you think.
Oh, there's no invite.
Yeah, I know. You could just join it in that case. That's true.
Yeah, in fact, I'm looking at it.
Okay.
When I saw in the rundown that you were going to be talking about it, I installed it. And there are 2 rooms, it appears, that are active. One called Talkaholic that has 4 people in it. 2 have already checked out. The other is called Setting Goals, and Timely Support is in there. 3 people active. 1 has checked out. I also, by the way, have been checking out Angle. And
I've not heard of that one.
Yeah, it's also on Jeremiah's list.
Okay.
But everything here is scheduled. There's like nothing happening right now. It's here's one that's scheduled for Thursday, March 18th. Sustainability Roundtable, healthcare and beauty products, coffee chat, 3D printed steak on Thursday, March 18th. The only one that I've seen where I can pop into a conversation going on right now and have a number of conversations that look appealing to me is Clubhouse. I think they're in a position to win this contest. As Chip says, I suspect Clubhouse will be on Android soon. I think that's true. I think I've even read that they're working on the Android app. But it is fascinating to see how many wannabes are jumping into this social audio space.
It's a bandwagon without any question. But if Timely's got something a little different, that's fine. I like what I've seen in their approach based on the Reddit conversations mostly. But like I said, I've not yet installed it fully and taken a look at it. You've done that, which is great. I am going to do that. Clubhouse is still iOS. Chip notes that they'll be on Android soon. I'm sure they will, and then they will end up being untimely. These guys, timely, possibly. I don't believe at all that Clubhouse are going to win this battle by any means. Twitter Spaces is not yet out, and they're integrated with Twitter, so that's a conversation we could have at some other point, I think, because they are integrated within that platform. And I think that gives them, an edge over Clubhouse, which is still within its own walled garden and all that stuff. But, anything can happen. And the other 59 that Jeremiah mentions may suddenly do something amazing. Who the hell knows?
And don't forget, Facebook is coming out with theirs.
Well, apparently so, but there's definitely a bandwagon gaining momentum here. And I think, as we'll be discussing in NFT, the word hype comes to my mind big with this. The only problem I've got with all of these things is I see so many people talking about, notably Clubhouse, come and join this, that, and the other. And these are depth conversations people are having. And they're relying on something ephemeral for stuff that you shouldn't be using this tool for this. If you're saying these are important discussions that will lead to us doing X, Y, Z in a year's time. I've seen one person saying that, and we're doing it on Clubhouse. Hang on a second. You're using a medium where once you've hung up the phone, as it were, it's gone. And that doesn't make any sense to me from a business point of view. But that's a conversation we could have another time, I think.
Well, I mean, you have ephemeral posts in Instagram stories. I read one post.
Yeah, but nobody I know uses Instagram stories for like a marketing campaign.
Oh, tons of people are using it for marketing.
Part of something. Yeah. But you don't use it to, say, announce your business plan or to do something like that. Document. And I'm seeing people talking about, let's talk on Clubhouse about our business plans for the next quarter, or let's talk about this new product we're developing that's going to do X, Y, and Z, and your input will help us fine-tune our plans. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me at all.
Oh, and then those people turn around and talk about it, and some of them may be influencers. But I read one article that they used the Goldilocks analogy. They said, like, podcasts are too much and something else is too little, and Clubhouse or social audio is just right. We'll see. I mean,
we'll see. Exactly.
Yeah, Chip wonders if it'll survive the end of the lockdown era, but we'll see.
I think it will. I think it will. I think these things will be with us for quite a while. There'll be a shakeout, no doubt. Who knows? I mean, really and truly, no one really knows. Clubhouse is the darling at the moment because they got first mover advantage straight away. They've got that FOMO factor. They got this exclusivity, and all the celebrities have been piling in. So it's getting constant attention.
Yeah, Bill Gates and Elon Musk. We talked about this last month.
We did. And no doubt we'll talk about it next episode as well.
Probably.
That gives you an indicator.
Yes, indeed. Well, we're going to talk about NFTs.
We are.
For a while, we're going to occupy the spots that would take up our fifth and sixth stories, because this is such a hot story right now. If you haven't heard of them, we mentioned at the top of the show that Phil Gomes was our first FIR interview guest in a long time. 3.5 years, by the way. I looked it up. And Phil and I talked about NFTs. It stands for Non-Fungible Token, because they are red hot right now. And of interest to communicators, they're all about content, digital content to be specific. The first thing Phil did in the interview was define fungibility. Something that is fungible is recreatable. And he used the example of a $20 bill. You have one, I have one, we can swap them, and nothing will have changed. All the 20s that are out there can be used in exactly the very same ways. Something non-fungible is something that cannot be replicated. It's one of a kind. It's unique. Some examples of non-fungible assets include, say, my first Twitter handle, @Shell. I don't use that anymore. I was getting too many tweets that were meant for Shell Israel, so I switched to @Shell Holtz. But now I get requests from people who want to buy that Twitter handle. Probably every 2 or 3 months, somebody makes me an offer to buy it. I also get offers to buy Holtz.com. Now, if I buy a ticket to a concert in section 204, row 9, seat 18, that's non-fungible. There's only one ticket for that seat at that concert, and I have it. And it's not a paper ticket anymore. It's in my events wallet on my phone with a QR code that they scan when I go into the arena. So we know what digital tokens are, right? They're a type of cryptocurrency that represent an asset, like a deed that resides on a blockchain and is linked to or represents an asset. So a non-fungible token, an NFT, is one that serves as a deed to something that is one of a kind. Now, there are ways to monetize digital assets that have been previously inexpensive or free, including art, video, music, tweets, GIFs, memes, by using blockchain technology to prove authenticity and ownership while permanently linking to a digital file to its creator. So, you buy a deed to a digital asset and you have the exclusive key to that deed, which resides on a blockchain where it cannot be changed or altered, but it can be bought or sold. And in fact, you can write into the logic for that token that every time it's sold, you get, say, 5% of the transaction fee, which will be transferred to your wallet automatically whenever someone sells it because it's written into the logic. So there is a description of what an NFT is. What has happened recently has made NFTs a headline-grabbing phenomenon. Some examples. Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, has offered an NFT of the very first tweet. You can own the very first tweet, which, by the way, was tweeted by Jack Dorsey. As of March 11th, the high bid for that first tweet was $2.5 million. The musician Claire Bauscher, who records as Grimes, sold digital artwork for more than $6 million. There was a digital animator who sold an NFT version of a viral animation, made $650,000 off of that. The most mind-blowing is a JPEG made by a digital artist known as Beeple. It's a collage of all the images that he's posted online every day since 2007. It was sold by Christie's in an online auction for, sitting down, $69.3 million, which is a new high for artwork that exists only digitally. The 2-week sales had a starting bid of that single lot of $100. Now, brands are starting to think about this. One gaming company is developing games on blockchain in which the assets you acquire as you play the game are NFTs you can buy and sell. Peter Shankman, who has been an FIR interview guest way back in 2008, has created Shank coins on the site rally.io. He says they give people with these coins a level of access to Peter that others don't get. About 300 people have requested them, and they can use them to get an invite to an exclusive discussion, for example. He says he can make them whatever he wants to be. Scott Monty has also, by the way, created coin that has his name attached to it in rally.io. Musicians can stream private concerts for coin holders. In fact, the Kings of Leon is releasing a new album as an NFT, a sort of deluxe version of their new album that will serve, among other things, as a lifetime ticket to the band's shows. It'll cost $50. It'll come with a digital download of the music, a vinyl LP, and other digital goods. They're minting 18 of these. They're only going to sell 6 initially. They'll be able to sell the rest of them off in the future, maybe for more money if the value of these things increases. The NBA, the National Basketball Association, has been selling short clips from recent games in a business that they've launched called NBA Top Shot. Phil talks a lot about this. It's like card collecting, but instead of cards, you're buying moments. As Phil said, a clip of a monster slam dunk by LeBron James will cost a lot, whereas one by an unknown rookie, not so much. But if you hold that rookie clip for several years and he becomes a superstar, then the price will go up and you can get more than you paid for it. Taco Bell has 5 editions of work, each priced at $1, not meant to generate revenue, just tap into a trend and produce buzz. But the proceeds go to Taco Bell's youth scholarships, and buyers get $500 gift cards to Taco Bell. So this is just the beginning of what you're going to see brands do. And I thought before we get into the criticisms of NFTs, we might just talk about the potential for them.
Yeah. You've outlined some examples, I think, already. I can see, well, what can I see? You start. Let me think about this a bit, Shell, because to be honest, my mind is a bit blanker than yours would be in looking at what brands could do with something like this. I'm seeing it mostly in the context of artworks, gaming, as you mentioned, of what people are doing, and then experiments of what some people are doing, like Scott Monty you mentioned, Pete Shankman you mentioned. Are those representative of what people and businesses can do with these things? I'm not sure at all, to be honest. This is so new, certainly to me. Although a friend of mine who is a big gamer said, hey, we do this stuff for like a decade, or he's exaggerating slightly, I think. But it's, yeah, you kick off that part of the conversation. What do you think?
I think there is tremendous potential. Chip even says that, like many technologies, NFTs are useful. Then he goes on to say some of the applications are absolutely mind-numbingly stupid and prove that P.T. Barnum was correct. P.T. Barnum said there's a sucker born every minute. I think he also said nobody ever lost money underestimating the intelligence of the American public. But I think as long as there is something unique that you can offer somebody attached to that token, that makes it valuable. It's not just the ownership of something, right? I mean, we're going to get into this later, but a digital asset can be recreated, and I can say, but I own the title, I own the deed to the original one on that deed is on a blockchain, it proves it's mine, doesn't keep people from copying it and sharing it if it's a meme or a GIF or something like that.
I think that is where, to me, it enters a questionable area of where the value really lies, particularly from a business or a brand or whoever's point of view. So how would this, for instance, apply to, I don't know, someone like Unilever selling consumer goods, where an NFT, where would that fit into the equation when they're selling Dove soap? Or they might be selling, I'm trying to think what else Unilever might own, Jar of Marmite, because they own the Marmite brand. So could it be, for instance, that they do occasional promo special editions of the product? Could that be? I think, yeah, but what's the benefit of that? Because all you do is ask more money for it, and people are going to pay for that in regular cash. So is this something... I'm mindful of a good commentary on Bloomberg by Leonard Bershitsky earlier this month. The headline caught my attention. NFT art is all about the hype. And I think, yeah, if there was a hype cycle for this, we all know the Gartner hype cycle from those early days, this would be on the upwards trigger slope leading towards the peak of inflated expectations. So it's got to plummet down to that trough and out again if it ever does. I'm talking mainstream use here. So it's big in the art market without any doubt. I've been reading a lot on the Christie's website, who are the auctioneer for Beeple's 69 million sale. So I just find it myself, I'm struggling to seriously understand how any of this translates into the mundane everyday of brand marketing. So that's where I'm struggling.
Well, let's take Unilever just as an example.
Yeah.
Let's take Marmite as an example. Let's say Marmite comes, I don't know if they do this, I'm making this up. Let's say Marmite comes out with a new flavor.
Oh my God!
Do they? Do they have extensions of the brand, or is it just
they do.
the one?
They had one about a year ago that had Marmite with Guinness in it.
Oh, there you go. So they launch Marmite with Guinness.
Yeah.
And the first 100 people to buy it get an NFT that takes them to a place where they can redeem a code for a mug that has the Guinness logo on it. Okay. In other words, they get something that other people buying the jar of Marmite with Guinness don't get because they've got the token. So maybe it leads to a rush for people to be among the first to buy. I'm like I say, I'm completely making this up. But as long as there is something unique attached to it, then I can see the value of brands jumping into this. And of course, at some point, they're going to stop. They're not even going to say this is an NFT. This is just the way that they're managing access to this exclusive content.
So it could be like an evolution of a marketing act that traditionally what you described happens now, but not using this. There are well-established methods by which you encourage people to respond to an offer. FOMO plays a big part, like in a lot of things with regard to marketing, where you're persuading people to do something, and people have managed quite nicely without digital cryptocurrencies of any type, or tokens or any of that kind of thing. So I guess that's where I really struggle with this, because I read like the example of Beeple's 69 million, trying to get my head around the fact that the seller makes 69 million, yet there's copies all over the place of the art. So who's getting the value, and what does it mean for, someone, he got 69 million for that. So what's the buyer getting for his 69 million? What does the buyer get?
The deed or the license that sits on the blockchain that says the original version of this belongs to me. You've all got copies.
Right, so that to him's worth 69 million. With me, I don't think I would do that, because
not in a million years, not in 69 million years.
Yeah, I own that, and no one else has a copy. So, whether I'm on a blockchain somewhere saying I own the original, or put it the other way around, I think if I persuade someone else to pay me 100 million because I paid 69, I want to make some money on this, I'll sell it on for 100 million. I'll be happy if that's the conclusion of this. Maybe that's where it goes. But one thing, just mentioning that Bloomberg piece, there's an interesting paragraph. Let me just read this bit out here. Let's be clear here, he says. The multi-million-dollar hype around it isn't necessarily revolutionizing art, the collectibles industry, or the concept of property. More likely, a specific community whose members have amassed fortunes thanks to cryptocurrency windfalls, or those who are trying to get in on the game, is spending some of this wealth to advertise the blockchain technology so that the money rain never stops. And certainly NFT applications are indeed worth attention, even if those applications aren't necessarily the ones in the news these days. So that actually muddies the water a little bit, but it shows this is not so easy to kind of grasp this as it might seem, it seems to me. And yet there are all sorts of people jumping on a bandwagon as if they do. So that's the thing I have. This, to me, has all the elements of a bubble. The hype is huge, and I therefore foresee a plummeting due soon.
Yeah, we can talk about the art for a minute. And of course, art was one of the first things that blockchain was applied to outside of just the mining of Bitcoin. On a blog called Continuations, let me read this to you. He says, put yourself 100 years ahead. We've made further progress in sensors and in 3D printing. You visit the Louvre, hold your phone up and take a depth scan of the Mona Lisa. It captures not just the visible light on top, but also every layer underneath it. Back home, you feed this into your advanced multi-materials printer, and it produces a perfect replica of the Mona Lisa. Admittedly, it would have to be quite advanced because it needs to deposit atoms at a time including specific isotopes, but there's nothing in principle standing in the way of doing this. Do you now own the Mona Lisa? No, you have a copy of it, even though your copy is now identical to the original. Imagine for a moment trying to sell it. I'm selling the Mona Lisa. Buyer, you mean the one hanging in the Louvre? Well, so, the fact that you have the original actually does stand for something for people who value having the original.
Right. It's a niche market then.
Of course it is. You can make a gazillion digitized copies of something. The one that's linked to the token is the same as all the others, except for the fact that there's one that the token links to. Somebody wrote, this means it's more equal than the others. This was on an Engadget post. The author here writes, ownership of the token does not, however, convey additional rights to the buyer. You don't own the copyright. You can't loan the file out to others in hopes of earning an income. And that's true of, say, the JPEG that sold for $67 million at auction, but I think it misses the point. First, there's the Kings of Leon notion that if you own the token, you get special access that is not equally available to everybody who just buys the album through conventional means. And second, you can give these away in a promotion. Imagine, say, Ford giving you a token when you buy a Mustang that links you to special resources about your car, and it may include live streams to NASCAR races. I'm kind of spitballing here, but as long as you can come up with something unique associated with it, then it has value.
Okay, so let me suspend my disbelief then, because I think I hear what you're saying. So basically, it's an evolution of what currently happens for those things that you described, because there are current methods to do all of that. So here we're talking about an evolution into an era that is digital, that is not dependent on, physical, analog things at all. And that would be the way things will likely happen in the future exclusively. So this has to coexist in the meantime. And I guess we have to go through a shakeout of all the weird stuff that's happening, where you've got, some people really clueless as to what they're doing. There's bandwagons everywhere. We'll get through all of that, and there will emerge from all of this something, that normal folks can readily understand. And that's a big part of what's lacking right now, because it's still very early days for this outside of those areas like art and gaming. Yet it's being mentioned a lot. And I did something the other day, just the day of the auction was done, the deal was done, and he got his money. I have a JPEG of it. That's now my wallpaper background in my Facebook profile. And I added a comment saying, hey, this is Nifty. Maybe it's too clever for people. I'm playing on the words NFT, on the letters NFT. Then I notice at least 20 I've encountered people who've got that as their Facebook header image. And I'm thinking, wow, so there's now even more multiple copies of this. That muddies the water more for the guy who spent 69 million. But you're right, he can be satisfied with he's got the first original. Should we call it that? The first original. Because the others are, you could argue, they're copies, but they're exact duplicates of that one. Well, you could argue that how we classify this now is different. Exact meaning, you made a copy of Beeple's JPEG. Is it precisely that in terms of the JPEG compression? The color palette, is it exactly the same? Because not every computer will do that. So maybe that's how you judge what's the original.
Yeah, well, I'm less interested in the art example than the album example, where buying the album through the NFT, and by the way, Dan York did tell us that they are called Nifty, at least some people are calling them Nifties, also gets you lifetime access to concerts. You take your wallet that's on your phone, you show that you have that, they scan a QR code, and boom, you're into the concert without having had to go through the process of buying a ticket.
I mean, Dan's jumped in on the comments with a good comment. Dan, this is a good one. I find the whole NFT thing absolutely insane. You are buying a digital pointer to something, and you can then claim to be the owner of something, except you don't actually have it. That actually sums it up pretty well, I reckon.
But I have the QR code that gets me into the concerts that I didn't have to pay for. Seth Godin's weighed on this. He wrote a post titled, NFTs are a dangerous trap. He points out that NFTs are absurdly easy to create. He could turn each of the 8,500 posts on his blog into tokens and sell them on the open market. What he worries about is that creators are going to spend more time promoting their digital tokens than they will creating content. As for buyers, he says they'll be bamboozled into thinking there's a scarcity of what they're buying, and he adds that most of the content will be like most art. It doesn't get sold to the Louvre, it gets sold at garage sales for a couple of bucks, not auctioned at Christie's. They won't attract much attention or interest at all. He writes, it's an unregulated, non-transparent hustle with bubble written all over it. But again, I think it misses the point about what they can be used for when you attach something to it. I mean, even if it's just an hour of consulting. You know, buy my Nifty and you get an hour of my consulting. And Phil and I talked about this, by the way, in the FIR interview. What happens if I leave the consulting business and somebody has paid for that, right? Seth does point out one more thing. And I know you've shared a link to this, Neville, in another post, and that's that it takes a ridiculous amount of electricity to create and trade NFTs, just as it does to mine Bitcoin. Seth concludes with this. The trap then is that creators can get hooked on creating these. Buyers with a sunk cost get hooked on making the prices go up, unable to walk away. And so creators and buyers are then hooked in a cycle with all of us paying the lifetime costs associated with an unregulated system that consumes vast amounts of precious energy for no other purpose than to create some scarce digital tokens.
Yeah, that's a good one. The story I saw was, about this was in Wired. NFTs are hot, so is their effect on the Earth's climate. That got my attention. But it's actually a good example they've made here that I think helps people understand why is this important. So this is to do with the copies. This is interesting. They talk about a French artist, Johnny Le Mercier, who has a reputation for really weird stuff with bending light sculptures and things like that. He did a piece of art that was, as Wired calls it, his first blockchain drop. The event involved the sale of 6 NFTs, which took the form of short videos inspired by the concept of platonic solids. In the clips, dark metallic polyhedrons rotate on loops and glisten, a reference to his installations in the physical world. The works were placed for auction on a website called Nifty Gateway, where they sold out in 10 seconds for thousands of dollars. The sale also consumed 8.7 megawatt hours of energy, as he later learned from a website called cryptoart.wtf. I love that domain extension. If you go there, by the way, it's suspended because of all the trolls piling in and making a real mess of what this guy was trying to measure of the energy consumption. So the thing is, you buy a piece of complex art like this, right? And you've suddenly got 20,000 copies. So every time anyone loads it on the computer and is doing stuff, processing power, time, the works, that's where you get 8.7. I was going to say 88 gigawatts, but we're not quite there yet, are we? We're 8.7 megawatt hours of energy. I don't actually know what that means, but it sounds a lot.
Yes, it does. And I know that the Bitcoin servers, also probably the Ethereum servers, NFTs all run off of the Ethereum.
Yeah.
But the process of doing the calculations that issue the coin is what consumes the energy. They have these huge server centers for those. But, you know, ultimately my view on these, at some point they're going to figure out the energy thing and figure out how to do this without consuming all that energy. But NFTs have been around for 15 minutes. As we know, the innovation comes after we have used something new to do what we were already doing before. I've made this point for decades that new technology doesn't kill old technology, right? Old technology adapts. And the first thing we do with new technologies are the things that we were doing before with old ones. The first thing we did with computers was word processing. Typewriters worked perfectly well, but we now had computers, so we did word processing. Who ever envisioned the internet in the earliest days of word processing? So what's going to happen with NFTs? I don't know, but I imagine there's a ton of innovation to come about how brands and people can use it. And by the way, just to tell you one more thing, give one more thing away from the interview with Phil, he created one as a gift for his wife on Mother's Day. It wasn't commercial. It was just something between them, but she was actually very touched by it. And if you listen to the interview, you'll find out why.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you're right, actually, on 15 minutes and people still trying to figure it all out. That makes sense to me. On the thing with old tech and new tech, you're right. Old tech doesn't necessarily, I'd insert the word necessarily die. It adapts, but not everything can adapt. So some will die with the ascent of new technology. So we're in the stage yet of not knowing what will continue, what won't. I think there's another aspect. Again, this is part of the emergingness of all of this as people are trying to figure out what it all means. This story that was on Gizmodo the other day, this to me is most interesting because I'm thinking, okay, how are they going to figure out this one? Because a story from DC Comics is telling artists to not post copies of stuff they own the intellectual property rights to and making them literally as NFTs to sell them, because some have already been doing that. There's a lot of Wonder Woman stuff out there about one of the artists who created Wonder Woman, who I'm thinking, wow, surely common sense would tell you wouldn't do that, because you're going to have the lawyers after you. If I were a lawyer in this area, I'd be rubbing my hands with glee right now, thinking of the work
a whole new practice area.
Oh my God, yeah. So this then is another thing that needs to be figured out. Intellectual property rights in an example like this that would apply to a corporation, where not like Beeple, who's an individual artist, he can sell his own stuff left, right, and centre, which he is doing. Here you've got an example of someone who's a comics artist. Just this one example, working for DC Comics, who's got a great reputation from back in the day of pencil drawings of Wonder Woman. And now it says in Gizmodo, he's probably most famous for making $1.85 million by selling NFTs of his drawings online, many of which featured Wonder Woman and other licensed characters. DC Comics is apparently not pleased with this development. That's a very subtle understatement. Yeah, you think, understatement, my God. So the real problem, the cynic who writes at Gizmodo says, is that DC didn't get a cut of the sales. I'm sure that's probably some truth in that, featuring its intellectual property, and worried that other artists may try to do the same thing. I can see the concern with that. You're going to have to address that pretty quickly. So this will prompt some changes in how organizations define ownership and permissions, plus contracts with people. So there's some big knock-on effects for something that has only been around for 15 minutes. So this shows you, I think, trying to control this. God, you're going to have to do some cool things with tech, I would say, like put digital fingerprints, digital markers in those JPEGs and other digital content that I don't know what they do. What would they do? Prove ownership? Would they stop it working in some form if you're not the authorized owner of a copy? I mean, the realms for trying to figure this one out are huge, I think. But this is a real world issue right now, it seems to me.
Yes, transfer that token to us now, or we're going to sick our lawyers on you. Right? Chip and Dan are watching live, and they're talking about the fact that NFTs are just ones and zeros and just fancy digital serial numbers. And I would point out that any currency is just a shared hallucination. I can pull out a $20 bill and say it's just some ink on some paper. I could take out a diamond and say it's just a rock that came out of the ground. We agree.
It's like an NFT. It lets you acquire things that you exchange for that bit of paper and ink.
Exactly. We agree as a society that these things have value. That's a shared hallucination. Any kind of currency. So I don't see NFTs being much different than that. But yeah, like I say, I think in 5 years' time, if this thing survives, and I'm not willing to say that they're going to be a big thing. They could fizzle in the next 3 or 4 months. But if they do really take off, it's going to be infrastructure that nobody talks about. It's the interface is going to be much cleaner, and there will be ways for people to transact them without having to think about the fact that it's on a blockchain or that they're getting a token. So we'll see. But it's sure interesting right now.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I'm just looking around at almost every day something new emerging, what someone is offering, amongst all the blue sky idiocy, and indeed some good ideas. I think this is a playground of hypesters, big time, and so I refer back to my own hype cycle on this, which I posted in my blog post I wrote about NFTs earlier this month. That says that NFTs are approaching the peak of inflated expectations. And I would say that they'll hit the peak, where are we, middle of March, before the end of March. In which case, then the next question is, how quickly do they plummet into the trough of disillusionment when people realize so many things about NFTs that don't meet their own inflated expectations, hence that peak? But the key thing is, how do they stay in that trough, or do they scoot up the slope of enlightenment into the plateau of productivity? How quick would that happen? Some might argue, based on what you and I've discussed, hey, that'll happen before the summer. They'll be out there on that peak, on that plateau. I doubt that. I think they'll be up and down in the trough and the slope for quite a while until something amazing happens. And there's no sign of something amazing happening yet. Maybe it's a lot to do with how this is communicated and understood by people. But I think the comments by some of our good friends, Chip and Dan, I agree with. Dan's note about he thinks that the whole thing's insane. Chip's note, his wife would kill him if he gave her an NFT.
Oh, you got to listen to the interview.
That's a great one. So it is Chip's right. The hype is getting nonsensical. So hence the point about it's nearly at the peak of inflated expectations. Sure.
I would be willing to bet by the time we record our next episode, which we are doing on Saturday, April 17th, for release on Monday, April 19th, we will have some case studies of brands that have come up with some rather innovative uses for NFTs.
And how they're trying to get out of the trough of disillusionment already.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Sounds great.
That'll do it for this episode of FIR. I want to remind everybody that we continue to have our FIR Zoom chats at 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays.
Yeah. Just think about these, by the way, dear listeners. These are like Clubhouse chats, so do come along. They're not recorded.
They're not recorded, and we talk about whatever comes up for 30 minutes. And these days when we're stuck in our homes, not able to go mingle with people at the office or in a bar, it's nice to catch up with people. And, usually Chip is there, Dan is there, Bill Spaniel, Jeff Picard joins us from time to time, and there's some other folks who drop in from time to time, and we'd love it if you would too. If you haven't joined us on one of these before, just drop us an email, and we'll get you the credentials. We don't just publish those because we've been Zoom bombed and don't want that to happen again.
Oh boy.
We would also love to get your comments. Send an email to fircomments@gmail.com. Attach up to a 3-minute audio file. We would love to have you on our show and contributing content that we will talk about. You can record that directly from the FIR website. Just click the Send Voicemail tab on the right-hand side of the page. Leave a comment directly on the show notes for this episode at firpodcastnetwork.com, or share your thoughts on the FIR community on Facebook. And of course, we would love it if you could leave a review on iTunes and subscribe. Listen. Well, check us out on iTunes.
And it's not called that anymore. It's Apple Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts. That's right. Oh God, that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.